And joining us now to talk more about how tariffs could affect the U.S. farmer is Joseph Glauber. He's a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. Thanks so much for joining us, sir. So we've been to this party before. We saw this happen during the first Trump administration. What does this set of countermeasures to U.S. tariffs mean for American farmers, in your opinion?
Well, I think there is a lot of concern, not just because, China's has been our number one partner off and on over the last 10 years, and we saw the effects in 2018, which were devastating, particularly for producers of corn and soybeans and other crops. The problem this time is, as was mentioned in the report, that we also have trade actions against Canada and Mexico. Mexico is a very large market for corn and soybeans as well. So farmers are very, very nervous.
And what are the specific challenges, do you think, for soybean and corn farmers with these increased duties?
Well, understand that the U.S. exports about 50% of its soybean crop. About 25% of its soybean crop, that is about 50% of exports, go to China. So if it doesn't go to China, it has to go somewhere else in the world. And frankly, China is the number one market in the world. It imports about 60-some-odd% of total soybeans. So the world can absorb right now, if the U.S. isn't able to sell to China, it can absorb the rest of those soybeans. A lot of them will have to stay in storage here, which means depressed prices, like what we saw in 2018 and 2019.
How soon will farmers, do you think, start to feel the pinch? And what are farmers calling on the Trump administration to do?
Well, I understand that typically exports are quite seasonal, particularly soybean exports. We'll begin to ship, typically we would begin to ship soybeans to China in July, August, September. It gets very heavy at that time. So there's a little bit of time, but markets are adjusting already. We've already seen futures markets for soybeans and corn and other commodities drop. So they are concerned. I think the hope is for many of these farmers is that the government will come in with additional assistance like it did in 2018-19, where it paid out, as was mentioned earlier in the report, some 25, 26, 27 billion dollars in additional assistance.
And are there any other government programs in place to help farmers cope with these trade tensions?
Well, farmers have a whole suite of price and income support programs that have existed since the 1930s, which also pay out additional monies. But remember, the $28 billion we were talking about in the previous report was in addition to those payments that they typically get under their price and income support programs, their insurance programs, et cetera. So these are massive losses that they had to absorb in 2018, and if not for those additional supplemental payments, they would have lost a lot of money.
Consumers have already been hit with high inflation. You heard in that earlier story, eggs are like gold. So when do you think consumers start to feel the impact at the grocery store of these latest tariffs?
Yeah, and that's a slightly different problem than the potential trade war with China or counter-retaliatory measures from Mexico. What on the food side is really the import barrier or the tariff barriers against things like fruits and vegetables, which come from China, processed foods which come from Mexico. Fruits and vegetables which come from Mexico, processed foods which come from Europe, Canada, Mexico. All of those things will have inflationary impacts on grocery bills.
Joseph, how can this tariff battle be resolved, in your opinion? Because the Trump administration wants to reduce the trade imbalance with China. The goals between Beijing and Washington are quite divergent. So what would some sort of deal look like?
Well, it's frankly very unclear. I think that in the past, when we've talked about additional tariffs, they've normally been to achieve some trade policy goal. Here, the goals seem very, very different. I mean, we've seen talk about reducing immigration in the case of Mexico and Canada, or reducing fentanyl. These are very different sort of policy goals, and so with very different metrics and unclear metrics about what would conclude a war like that. So hopefully a trade war can be resolved through negotiations and get back to more normal relations, something we haven't seen for, more than 8 years now. So it would would be great to get back to normal trade relations.
Joseph, how different do you think the U.S.-China relationship on trade is, compared to the U.S. and Canada and U.S.-Mexico?
Well, China is a huge market. That's what's very important. We do have a number of trade issues with China, but mainly on industrial policies. I'd say less on agriculture, although we have a few irritants there. But generally, we export a lot to China on the ag side, and so that's been a very good market. With Canada and Mexico, of course, that's been essentially zero tariffs on most items, and so we have a very integrated market. With livestock markets where we import feeder pigs and grow them in the U.S., slaughter them, export meats to other countries. So these tariffs are very, very disruptive across the board in North America.
I think everyone is hoping for resolution soon. Thank you,
Yes.
Joseph Glauber, for your time and perspective.
Thanks.